In William Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, Brutus and Cassius stand on the floor of the ancient Roman Senate, their arms covered in the blood of the man they have just conspired to kill. And Cassius ponders to himself, how many ages hence shall this our lofty scene be acted over, in states unborn and accents yet unknown? It's a startling moment which we would now call meta, as a writer living in smelly, bustling Elizabethan England imagines two men in ancient Rome during their darkest hour, pondering him. But even William Shakespeare could not have imagined the afterlife of his works, from lunchboxes and advertising campaigns to grand opera and camp TV series. Hello friends, welcome to Podcast Shakespeare. This is episode 1, the prologue to our comedy. I just want to give you a very brief overview of why I'm embarking on this journey. I discovered Shakespeare at a young age, first with the release of Kenneth Branagh's Much Ado About Nothing, and then at age 8, when my parents took me to a touring production of A Midsummer Night's Dream. To this day, I can recall the experience of being the only child in that audience, and by far the loudest one laughing in the room. I feel sorry for those poor actors in retrospect. It must have been actually rather frustrating. As I grew and studied, I discovered the vast range of Shakespeare's works and legacy, from the Elizabethan stage to the Victorian music hall, from translations halfway around the world to big-budget films. His works speak to us still in so many ways, many of which we're not even conscious of. And yet, as an adult, I am constantly asked by friends and even new acquaintances how they can get into Shakespeare. Or I'm told why they don't think he's for them. And now, as our society has become more fragmented and the advent of technologies like Netflix and Spotify has provided access to most any culture ever created, we all have this temptation, this easy temptation of staying firm within our own bubble. So I suppose that's why I'm here. I want to demystify the bard, to explore the bard, to enjoy the bard. I'm going to delve into the academic arena, looking at the historical context of the work and also the thematic resonances. At the same time, I'll bring my own experiences as a theatre maker and a theatre goer into the midst. And it's not all academic by any means. We'll be discovering popular music, art, radio dramas, Disney movies, television shows, opera, literature, right through to stories of real-life political and social upheaval. I'll be working my way chronologically through the Shakespeare canon. It means we'll start with some lesser-known works, true, but it's worth it to explore Shakespeare and his world in context, and look at his development as an artist. I intend to record probably 2 episodes for each play. The first one will look at the plot, the themes, and the critical history of the play, what academics, historians, and others have thought of it. In the 1810s, for instance, Jane Austen wrote in a letter that she was disappointed not to see Shakespeare's King John, a play which for most of the 20th century has been disregarded by almost every theatre company. Meanwhile, we have no evidence of anyone performing Troilus and Cressida until after World War I, when modern audiences began to discover the truths in what it had to say. The second episode on each play will be a popular history of the work on stage and screen, music, and in the popular consciousness. Between looking at each play, I'll do a shorter episode examining other relevant topics, a mini documentary if you will, be it on Shakespeare's marriage or that pesky question of whether he actually wrote these plays. Is this podcast for you? I hope so. I hope it's for everyone. There won't be any pre-written assumptions about what you know. One of my least favourite phrases in writing is, of course. As in, oh, well, Shakespeare, of course, didn't have much of an education. But at the same time, I hope to go deep enough into the works that there's something for the most seasoned listeners. Overall, my attitude is one of love. I'm not someone who believes every comma was written by Will himself. And when we look at how Elizabethan publishing worked, you'll understand why. But I'm going to offer redemptive readings, assuming that we can trust the text, or at least that we have to trust the text that has come down to us, unless it simply can't be justified. That's not to say that I think everything Shakespeare wrote is spun gold. There's some absolute nonsense among his complete works. Some rubbish, some dull bits, and occasionally some cringeworthy bigotry that we have to toss in the historical context pile and grimace our way through. But everything in his works makes sense as a popular playwright, composing for his company to perform these works day in and day out for the public in a period of great linguistic change, and great social change for that matter. One of the complexities of being a 21st century bardolater is that regular conflict between how and why the bard wrote his plays and how we appreciate them now.
That is for every schoolboy and schoolgirl for the next 400 years. Have you any idea how much suffering you're going to cause? Hours spent at school desks trying to find one joke in A Midsummer Night's Dream. Years wearing stupid tights in school plays and saying things like, "What ho, my lord," and "Oh, look, here comes Othello," talking total crap as usual. Oh, and... that is for Ken Branagh's endless, uncut 4-hour version of Hamlet.
So, how can you get the most out of this podcast? Well, if you can, make sure you've got a good version of the complete works. For a 1-volume edition, the Oxford, the Arden, or the Royal Shakespeare Company complete works are all fantastic. For more elucidation, the individual Penguin editions are delightful. They're easy to read and they're helpful with imagining the play on stage. There are other exciting academic single editions, but I'll hold off from that for now. And if you can afford it, or if you live near a good library, listen to the Archangel Shakespeare recordings. These audio productions were made around the turn of the century, with all 38 of the mainstream plays being performed unabridged on disc. Just to scratch the surface, the cast includes David Tennant, Trevor Peacock, Jane Lapotaire, Damian Lewis, Brian Cox, Francis Barber, Eileen Atkins, Bill Nye, Samantha Bond, Stella Gonet, Ajoa Ando, Sinead Cusack, Stephen Mangan, Joseph Fiennes, Jennifer Ely, and Sir John Gielgud. We'll be talking about the magic of live theatre every single week on this podcast, but if I had to be honest, the best way to truly come to terms with Shakespeare is to sit down with a glass of wine, an annotated text of the play, and one of the Archangel recordings. It was once popular to believe that Shakespeare should be listened to and read as much as be seen, but that view is now dismissed by many great people. I'm not one of them. I often think of the late great podcaster Frank Delaney, who would regularly rhapsodize the effects of listening to Shakespeare while reading along. Theatre is a way of exploring the works, but reading them is a way of understanding the words. Anyhow, I'm not here to persuade you of anything. I'm only seeking to offer one opinion, drawn from other opinions. But I do think it's of the utmost importance that we learn from our forebears, and that all of us aspire to absorb the higher echelons of our cultural history. Education and discovery enrich us as individuals, but they also reward us as a society. It's about self-improvement, sure, but it's also about the pure joy that lies in discovering countless works of creativity that adorn our past, by Shakespeare or otherwise. The academic Harold Goddard once wrote that the greatest poetry has always depicted the world as a little citadel of nobility, threatened by an immense barbarism, a flickering candle surrounded by infinite night. And I think that statement is true now more than ever. So I hope you'll join me in the coming weeks as I begin my trek through the country of Shakespeare's work. We're going to hear some of the world's greatest operas, read novels and poetry, watch both inspiring and trashy television, and we'll hear the stories of marvellous people from the last 450 years, starting with William Shakespeare, the bard himself. There's a lot to explore, and I won't be holding myself to any clock. Episode length will range as much as the subject matter, but I hope that you can come away from each episode having learned something you can carry forward with you. And if you'd like me to learn anything, you can contact me through social media. I'm on Facebook, at Pod Shakespeare, Twitter, also at Pod Shakespeare, or you can email me anytime at podcastshakespeare@gmail.com. I hope to hear from you, and I hope that you'll stick around for what's to come.